Welcome to the Heart Rate Variability Podcast. Each week we talk about heart rate variability and how it can be used to improve your overall health and wellness. Please consider the information in this podcast for your informational use and not medical advice. Please see your medical provider to apply any of the strategies outlined in this episode. Heart Rate Variability Podcast is a production of Optimal LLC and Optimal HRV. Check us out at optimalhrv.com. Please enjoy the show. Welcome, friends, to the Heart Rate Variability Podcast. We are on chapter 2 of our series with the heartbeat of business. So if you're just joining us for the first time, highly encourage you to go back a few weeks, to episode 1 of this series. We are playing the chapters of our audiobook. We had a great audiobook producer voice for this, so I really love sharing those with folks. So we are on chapter 2, so get the full experience. Go back to episode 1, listen to the foreword, the intro, and chapter 1. We'll get you all caught up. But I'm really excited to have this conversation with Ina and Dave today about chapter 2 as we work on understanding health and wellness with heart rate variability. Many ways, this is the chapter that really motivated me to talk about writing this book with the two of you, because I really think, especially in a time of probably off the chart, unprecedented burnout and hardships at work and in the rest of our lives, to me, this is sort of the core piece of looking at heart rate variability. So in this chapter, we look at both the individual and the group health. And we're going to talk about both today with a particular focus on the group side of things, because we have probably, I think, 81 episodes where we really focus on the individual piece. So we're going to focus a little bit more about bringing this into the organizational development. Now, if you have a group, let's say you've got a group you're working out with at the gym and you're sharing data, you can think about it in that context as well. But we'll think specifically a little bit about the workplace as we go through chapter 2 as well. So, Ina, I want to start with you because I want to talk about states and traits. This is something that I've been obsessed with ever since, and I posted when I was doing the Trauma Informed Lens podcast, my learning curve when I got introduced to heart rate variability. And what I was really kind of struggling with at first is this measuring my overall health and wellness, or is heart rate variability measuring how I'm doing today? And I came to the conclusion of the answer is both, but the metrics, I'm looking at different data to answer that question. So I want to sort of kick it to you with the idea of a state being more, how am I doing today? How am I doing right now? Traits being metrics of overall health and wellness. And I'll kick it to you because I love hearing you talk about how heart rate variability can really quantify both of these if we are looking at the right things.
Absolutely. It's a great question, a really important distinction that I think people really need to keep in mind when tracking and measuring their HRV. So when you take your heart variability on any particular morning, it tells you how are you doing at that moment. You can use it to give you an idea of how the rest of your day, might go. Mm-hmm. But that's probably about it, right? So your indicator on that one day really tells you about that moment, and maybe the rest of the day gives you some idea of how to plan that day. In order to get an idea of how you're functioning overall, right? So get an idea of your trait, heart variability, you really need to do a decent amount of tracking. I would say 5 to 7 days of daily reading, so will give you a much better idea of your trait heart variability. Any one of these readings is a state HRV, and it's influenced by a myriad of different factors, right? How well you slept the night before, how late, you went to bed, how many drinks you had the night before, how stressful your day was, et cetera, all sorts of things go into that one reading. And therefore, any one reading is really not a very reliable way of telling you how are you doing overall. But if you get a collection, say, 5 to 7 days, you're going to start getting an idea of how are you doing, because all these outliers and kind of one-time type of influences are going to get washed out in that average. So you're gonna 5 to 7 days is a good place to start. I still would caution you. This is even your week-long average might have been influenced by you're recovering from some sort of virus, right? Or you've had a month-long really difficult period at work. All of that is going to influence your weekly HRV. It may still not be entirely accurate indicator of how are you doing overall. So the more measurements you have, the more accurate your estimate of your trait HRV, and therefore your trait ability to self-regulate and be resilient and adapt to change is. But 5 to 7 days is a really good place to start.
Great. Dave, I just want to see if you have anything to add to that. Ina kicked us off really strong there with that answer. But anything else that you in your work sort of think about this state trait and how you help people live healthier lives?
Yeah. So I guess to echo what Ina was saying there with a single reading, we can't really tell much from, and even a couple readings, we have to have that average going, and the more we have of that, the better. So when you really start to look into the weeks, the months, the years, that's where we can really start to draw a lot of conclusions. And it's always one of those, and I think the book does a great job of saying this too. When a single day reading is different, is that something that we have to be scared of? Mm-hmm. And that's something that I get, that patients will ask about, or my mom will ask about sometimes. What do I do now?
Yeah.
and you go, well, how are you doing?
Yeah.
What is going on? What is the context of this? And then we get into, then we begin to really understand when we begin to add context to a reading, which is huge, which is why we have, the tags on our app, which is why I encourage people to do journaling in addition to, because once we get that context along with a good trend, then we can really start to make a good call there. And simply, it really is. The more data that we have, the better we can predict or tell what is going on. And I do like that you said, a single day reading can tell you about that state of how you are doing right now and how a day may go. And it's also a great indication to say, all right, well, what can I do right now to change this? Just because I woke up this way doesn't mean that my day has to be bad. And equally, just because you wake up doing really well doesn't mean that your day is going to go awesome. If you front load that with something horribly stressful, that can absolutely tear you down, and vice versa, right? If you wake up in a poor state, can you do something about that? And the answer is absolutely yes. And we get into some of that in later chapters in the book on how you can actually pull yourself out of something negative.
So I love in this chapter, because this is what I like, what excites me about innovation is you hit these ethical dilemmas, and being part of the innovation around biometrics, you hit these things. And one of the ones that I've wondered about, I'd love to get both of your opinion. I'll start with you, is for me to get up and my heart rate variability isn't great today. What's on my agenda? I got to record an online video. I got to do a podcast with two of my good friends. I got to walk the dogs. Maybe I get to the gym to do an old man workout. That's I'm probably not going to hurt myself or anybody else today. Even if I screw something really bad up, probably not going to hurt anybody. However, so let me throw this out here. I don't want a surgeon necessarily operating on me if my HRV is 80% of what it normally is. I don't really want to get on a plane with a pilot whose HRV has crashed. I worry about people like police officers whose decisions can be life and death, because when we're talking about, surgeons, a 10% error in surgery could kill me. A mistake, they've done interesting studies with police officers I've seen with heart rate variability is when they do that thing where things pop up and the guy decides to shoot or not. I'm sure there's a name for that. Low heart rate variability, they don't make as good as decisions. And in the real world, you might be that person that could be dangerous or not. And so, I'd love to get, as we hit our kind of first ethical dilemma here in this, what are your thoughts on this about, for me, it's a bad day it's not a big deal. However, for certain occupations, it could be, if we want to just get over dramatic for dramatic purposes, a life or death sort of scenario.
What a good question. And, realistically speaking, and it is a little scary, right? If a police officer wakes up with 80% of their typical HRV, are they going to call out of work? No, probably not. Yeah. Right? Is a surgeon or a pilot going to call out of work? No. That's so I guess we would probably prefer not to think about that. But as Dave said, a lower number in your morning reading is not a guarantee that your day is shit and you're going to kill somebody, right? Yeah. It does tell you, though, that you want to be a little more careful. It's probably a good idea to take a little extra time that morning to do some HRV biofeedback training. Is it going to completely reverse how your day is going to go? Probably not, but it is going to remind your body how to regulate itself. This is particularly helpful if you already have a well-established HRV biofeedback practice. Yeah. If you do your 20 minutes a day, 6-7 days a week, and that one day when you're waking up with your HRV being a little bit lower, maybe including an extra session, your body will take that as a good reminder, and it will help you self-regulate just a bit better. Mm-hmm. Maybe you take a little time to meditate. Maybe you pay attention to your breakfast that morning a little bit better than you normally would. All of those little things really do add up. And, maybe, if possible, you take some extra breaks that day. Maybe you take a few minutes before, you start that surgery, or, before you get on the plane to do another HRV practice. So there's small ways that you can mitigate those lower numbers, but you also, even just the awareness that I may not be entirely at my optimal goes a really long way. It will help people be a little bit more attentive to their internal states. It will help them pay slightly different attention to their decision-making process. I know, I've had days, and these are not life or death situations, but when sitting with patients, I certainly want to be at my best. And just like a surgeon is not going to cancel their day if their HRV is a bit lower, I don't cancel my patients if I am waking up not feeling at my best, but I'm aware of it. And I might take a few extra seconds to think through my answer when we're talking about something particularly tricky. Or if I have to help somebody navigate through a difficult decision, I'll be paying better attention to my own decision-making process. So that awareness in itself goes a very long way, along with the little things that, if you do a few of those little things, they might add up to a fairly significant difference in how you're doing.
Yeah. Dave, I'm going to challenge you even more with this. Okay, so now I'm the supervisor, and I see my surgeon is not doing well today. But I want to say my surgeon hasn't been doing well for a week. is there any point, as sort of the medical person in the group, and I know you're not doing surgery, but if you think about the airplane pilot, or you think about the police officer, you think about, the surgeon, do you have any idea when should we be worried? Because maybe a red day for a pilot and a bad day for a pilot, it's probably get us up and down. There's a co-pilot there, probably going to be okay. A week's worth of bad scores, I might be a little bit more. So do you have any suggestions for supervisors of, now we get this data, which I think is a really good thing, because it was happening whether we knew it or not. Now it's explicit. Do you have any suggestions about how to think about, once those scores, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, a week worth of really bad scores?
This is a very difficult dilemma,
Yes.
because as a supervisor, you sit there and you say, if this pilot doesn't fly, we're losing all of this money, right?
Exactly.
Or we have to call in backup, and that may
Yeah.
be, that might be worse.
Yes.
So it's a very challenging thing to make a call on. But what we do know is, yeah, when you start showing, 2, 3, especially moving into 4 or more days of trending down, yeah, your reaction time is down, your mental performance is down, your physical performance is down. So the likelihood that something is going to go wrong just keeps going up and up and up. So, well, what's it worth if something goes wrong on an airplane? What's it worth if something goes wrong during a surgery? And we're not talking about little things in cases like that, or a police officer, for example. These are things that can potentially be life or death situations. And in that case, it may be best to say, hey, let's have you take the day off, and we will bring in the backup pilot. And also, that is not just take the day off, but it is a lot more of, hey, what's going on, man?
Mm-hmm.
Are you getting sick? Is there stress in your marriage, your home life? Is there something more happening? And I go on and on about this quite a bit, but that's what I love about HRV, is that it takes the focus off of the immediate thing that is, always right in front of you. Well, what's wrong with you, man?
Yeah.
Why aren't you tough enough?
Yeah.
It's no longer that. It is, hey, let's look at this person for everything they are, because all of that is playing into how they're performing here. And as a leader, you have to understand that what happens everywhere in this person's life affects how they perform in their job. So if you are a good leader and you do take that time to say, hey, what's going on? Maybe you can help them find the proper resource, right? And a solution to a potentially much bigger problem. So I think that is a good place to go. And then of course, as we go back to the original question of, well, do you tell them to not fly? Do you tell them to? And I think, if we were really being scientific and we were really looking at the science, that it would back up and it would support saying, no, let's have a plan B in place here. Let's have a backup pilot, hopefully who's also being monitored, and is in a good place to go. That's actually, I'd like to use a great example that just came up. My neighbor, who's we're relatively close to them. He is in his 60s, and he was going in for surgery. He was having some kind of modification, not a hip replacement, but some kind of modification to his hip. And anyway, he was going in for the surgery, and about 2 days before, he caught a cold, and he was sick, and he told his surgeon that, and they chose to go ahead with the surgery anyway. And the recovery should have been very quick, and it should have been very easy. Now we're almost 3 weeks out, and his recovery is going horrible. Oh. And you ask, is that because his heart rate variability was down? He was that stressed, and this is no longer the surgeon, but the patient, right? Mm. The patient wasn't in a good place. So was it the right decision to still do that surgery? Had he not been sick and his nervous system not been challenged that much already, would he be in a totally different spot 3 weeks out in his recovery? And that's, again, where we look at this, what call do you make? Because he had been waiting months for that surgery. So, it's tough, but if recovery would have gone better, would that have been worth it?
Right.
I'd say.
Right, for the patient, for sure, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that this is the world we are coming to. This world is, you look at what the biometrics, their big tech conference going out. I've been paying attention to the health tech that's out there. Pretty soon your toilet is going to give you feedback. Your clothes are going to give you feedback. I mean, we're going to have all this data, which really can make surgeries more effective, can make society safer. I mean, the police, when working with, I've worked with some police forces. I mean, just what do you do with that as a police chief, knowing that you can get access to this data, and that data is going to be has been proven to be predictive of decision making in high stress situations. There's a dilemma. And I just think what we want to put on the radar, because this isn't the only dilemma presented in this chapter, is it's something to think about as you look at this piece of things. And, we provide, and definitely with Optimal HRV, one of the fascinating things that we saw was as we created a dashboard initially for clinicians like you both, to monitor population health, to monitor treatment efficacy, those sort of things. We also really created a dashboard for managers as well to monitor workforce health. And, I just sort of wanted to throw out there, as we look at this for groups, because we've in this podcast so often talked about population norms and individual health. As we like to say, it's almost a mantra now. Look at the population norm, forget about it, because your goal is to get better than you were last week. You always want to, basically, it's like golfing by yourself. You just want to get a better score than you did last time out. So, Ina, as we start to do more and more work with organizations, I just want you to sort of, a manager can log into the dashboard, and let's forget the individuals right now, but can start to see this collective group health. And I just kind of want to get your reflections on, what do you see when you work with folks? Because I know you work with elite athletes, you work with elite military forces. What does some of this group data, knowing there's variations in genetics, all that, what does that start to tell us over time?
Again, really good question. And, we can kind of treat that organization as a single entity. And yes, we get a whole collection of scores, but it's almost like one being, in a sense of, we get some idea of state health and trait health. You can take a look at your dashboard and get an idea of how is my team, my group, my company doing this morning, and it will give you an idea of do I really challenge them today, or maybe today is a day when we take it a little bit easier, maybe build in some again, extra breaks or some team building exercise. I don't know, something like that. Or, is everybody at their peak, and maybe today we do go for that task that we've been considering. Or, if you're implementing something new, let's say, you're a manager who's innovative and, goes to learn things and, figures out how to implement new skills and new management techniques, and it's really important to establish a baseline, right? Just like with a person, you want to establish, say a couple weeks of your group health baseline, and then you start implementing your skill and see how the group HRV changes. Weeks after you start implementing that new skill or that new protocol, or something of the sort. So really, if you're not looking at each individual team member, the organization is not that different from an actual person in what you do with that data. You're looking at that collective entity data and examining it in a similar way.
Yeah. So, Dave, I'm not going to say this is an ethical dilemma at you, but it's a tough one because, one, we are very upfront. You should never punish an employee for a heart rate variability score. In fact, I've said to very publicly, we will fire you as a customer if we hear you do that. That to me crosses an ethical line that we don't want to work with you. Maybe somebody else will. We're not the company to work with you if you punish that. But I don't know, you got 8 or 10 clinics and other things going on in your life. I'm fascinated with, so let's say you have a group of 20 people. Let's say you have a group of 20 people. You've got now an average. And what I love about our dashboard is we're going to give you an average, and we're also going to give you a population norm for that group. So now you have a group of people, a team, maybe an entire organization, and because of the number of people, that population norm probably can give you some insight. Is this group healthy or is this group struggling? And while we will fire you immediately if you punish an employee for an HRV score, I'm not totally against it being a metric to assess managers. And I would just love to get your thing, because we know HRV is a predictor of cognitive ability, the ability to engage with customers, patients, clients socially, emotional regulation, and medical health. Again, medical health, kind of an outlier, but the other things are so crucial to most business success. So we kind of make the point in the book that a manager's responsibility, at least in part, yes, business outcomes need to happen, but to keep a workforce healthy is likely going to improve performance. And I would love to get your thoughts on that statement.
So yes, another dilemma indeed, and a difficult one, right?
Yeah.
It is really hard to to say to an employee, well, hey, your HRV was down by 30% today, so just stay home and rest, right? That's not something that we would say. But it may be an indication to say something, and especially if we're seeing this trend happening, let's reduce novelty in their work environment, at least for the moment, right? Because we know that novelty is going to be the most stressful thing for your nervous system. So can we reduce that in any way for this particular person who is down? And that may be that, okay, well, there's a list of things that you have to do, and these you're very familiar with, these you do every single day. So let's focus on those things for today, and let's push this off until tomorrow. But what if that very important new thing has to get done today? Okay, well, then we're going to give the opportunity for this person to, let's say, because cigarette breaks are no longer a thing, but
Maybe we threw out breaks altogether in
right?
the process.
But what about mindfulness breaks, right?
Yes.
Let's do that. Let's say, okay, you have to do this thing at 10 a.m. today. Yep. So at 9:30 or at 9 a.m., let's give you a moment to go and recharge your nervous system. Make sure that you are prepared for this thing that you have to get done. And that can be, like was saying, a breathing exercise. It can be whatever it is for that individual that is most effective. And for most people, they're going to find, especially when they are doing it consistently, again, as Ina said there, that we would find that the breathing exercises are going to be the easiest access and the most effective. But that would be one way to handle that type of a situation. Now, on the other hand, if one person is doing great and the other person isn't, is there a possibility? Does your company have the opportunity for overlap where, and I think of this, an application more to my own office, where there is some crossover between employees. So it would be easy for this person to step up and be the front desk role and be the interaction with the patients, whereas this person can do a lot more of the back end, bookkeeping work and tracking things and stocking supplements and whatnot that doesn't need that involvement. So if that's a possibility as well, we can look at things like that. So just a little bit of a shift in what somebody's focus would be for the day would be a lot more along the lines of what I would be a fan of, rather than saying don't show up at all.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I think what's really fascinating as you start to look at creating groups in our dashboard, looking at different, you think about a larger organization, and you can really start to track how's the accounting part, how's the C-suite doing, is a manager struggling, and is that reflected in their team's collective heart rate variability scores? Again, if you look at the heart rate variability science and you look at what sets businesses up for success, cognitive ability is going to be up there. The ability to engage in most jobs, other people socially, whether that's your teammate, whether that's customers, consumers that you're working with, and then emotional regulation. If you got somebody going off, probably not good for anybody's morale in that. So we can really start to measure aspects of the organization. And that's, again, where you don't necessarily want to compete Dave's team versus Ina's team versus Matt's team, but you start to look at team versus population norms, monthly averages, just like Ina said, all-time averages. And you can, what happens when, let's say, a key member leaves a team? What happens to that team score? You can start to really measure, in my world, that, in social services, we'd even get attacked by people we were trying to help. What kind of big incidents, or somebody brings a weapon into the waiting room? What's that do to collective heart rate variability? How does our management team handle that personally, but how do we help folks recover from that as well? I mean, I love being in the tech world. I watch all these documentaries on tech, and they do these sprints, and like they were sleeping under the desks, and then they turn out a really bad product, and it's like, well, because you ran yourself into the ground, you did a lot of stupid things. And I think we can start to connect these in a little bit of a different way, because if all Matt's pilots or all Matt's surgeons are not doing well, maybe there's something about the organizational environment as a variable too, which I think is really exciting, that we could start to ask those questions. I honestly get more excited in the business world for those collective scores than necessarily the individual. I think the individual has a lot. It's a game changer in and of itself, but really looking at those group scores as well, I think is really exciting.
That's such a good point, Matt. And I'll, interject for a moment. Perfect example of where this might come in such a helpful way is looking at heart survivability for residents, medical residents. Those who are doing 36-hour shifts, and those that are kept to, no more than 12 hours. Right. And, how are they doing? Yes. How are they doing overall? How are they doing towards the end of their shift? I'm not aware of such a study being done, although it might be out there. But this would be a really helpful way to track how we're training our medical personnel and other folks as well.
Absolutely, and I think I see movement away from the stupidity of how we train medical providers. And I'll be very frank and honest with you. I don't care if my medical provider can run an intellectual marathon. I want them to be cognitively awake when they see me in the room. And I think finally, which blows me away, it took this long. It's risky putting somebody who's been working a 36-hour shift with a patient, because the misdiagnosis, mistreatment, all those other things as well. I want to get this. I've been talking to a few people about getting this into social work schools, because even though it might not be necessarily a surgery or something like that with a resident, a medical diagnosis or treatment, if we are putting people, especially through their internships and others, if they're burned out when they're leaving school, can we teach them the skills to be healthy? So we get folks in social services, healthcare, educators off the top categories for burnout. And what a better time to learn that is part of your training. So you have these coping skills coming out of that. So when we talk about organizations, I think schools, graduate schools, medical schools, undergrad is a great time to start to quantify this. How's your university do keeping your students healthy? Here's a way to find that out, which I think can be incredibly powerful as a learning tool as well with this. So let's kind of wrap up here with another ethical dilemma. This chapter is full of them. And this kind of goes to what I said before is we will not work with you if you are going to fire or punish people because of a low heart rate variability score, where we're not going to go there with you for a range of reasons. I just don't think it's ethical because it could be the work environment that's stressing them out. So, however, here's something I found really interesting when I started talking about doing this as sort of a self-care staff resiliency tool is probably, I would say 9 out of 10 people that I would just teach about heart rate variability. And they get really excited about integrating in their program, integrating it with patients or clients. And then I would turn it to them to say, this could also measure the wellness of your team or organization. And the statement I heard so much was, I would never share my heart rate variability score, which they just learned about 5 minutes earlier, with my supervisor. Now, my first thought is you give them your social security number. I don't know if you still get birth certificates when you start a job. It's been a while since I've had a real job. But you basically give all the information you need to take out a loan in the person's name. But God forbid I give them this biometric that I didn't even know what it was 5 minutes ago until Matt introduced it to me. The other follow-up that I got to throw in there too is, what if you got $25 Starbucks gift card? Oh, of course I'd share that with them. So like, it's like this thing I would never share unless you give me like, and $25, what buys you 2 espressos nowadays? You give me 2 espressos, sure, take it, do whatever you want with it. So Ina, I know you've thought a long time about heart rate variability. I'd love to get your impressions on this. As we've worked with organizations, I know, to de-identify data, to give people code names, to even give people reports that de-identify who it is. I think that there's a benefit to you knowing if you're my boss, that my daily scores, because as Dave said, we can offer support, and that should be the business environment. Is how do you help Matt, who might be doing something very serious or might not, deal with a low day, but also protecting confidentiality as well. I'd love to I know you've had conversations like this as well too.
Yeah, and this is definitely a tough one. I also don't have a boss to share this with, but when I did, I would be thinking 50 times before sharing.
Yes.
Before sharing my HRV scores with them. I think a few things for us to consider. There has to be a lot of trust in order for the team to feel comfortable sharing their scores with the manager. My personal view, the only way to make this be ethical is to never mandate sharing the HRV scores. If a new team member joins the team, they don't have that trust established. They may not feel comfortable, being forced to share, their biometrics seems really intrusive and just wrong. But when a team members and managers know each other well, when there is a lot of trust, it certainly gives a great incentive to develop that trust and develop that interpersonal rapport. And then if the team members feel like, well, I can share, I feel safe, feel safe sharing my HRV scores with my manager, that can absolutely be helpful. Yes, because then the manager can check in, not from a punitive standpoint, but rather, hey, can I help you in some way? Can I support you in some way? What's going on? Do we need to take some things off your plate? And so there are definite benefits when the trust and the safety is there. We might consider having some sort of tiered approach to this, where the manager is seeing de-identified scores, and the manager doesn't know which person is attached to which number, but perhaps there is someone else on the team who does. And the manager might call on that person. Perhaps it's somebody in human resources, or it's a wellness officer, someone who is responsible for then reaching out to those who are perhaps struggling for a few days, or whose HRV scores are not quite so high, and that really takes away from that fear of punishment from a manager. That hierarchy is well, it's different, right? So if you have if you have a wellness officer reaching out to see how you are, somebody who has no decision making in your raises or in your promotions or in the assignments you're given, but rather somebody who's just there to help you be at your best, and including figuring out when is a good time to let your manager know that something is going on.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing I'd love to get your thoughts on, Ina, as well, is I think, that there is the question. So let's put police officers, surgeons, off to the side. And let's talk about the 99% of people whose jobs probably don't have life or death decisions, or a mistake doesn't end up in a serious situation. I lean towards, and this is what I love to get your feedback on, and we talked a little bit about this in the book too, that for the most part, don't worry about the day-to-day scores. I think it's not really your business if I go out and have a couple drinks on a Tuesday, as long as I show up and do my work, right? So I really like, or maybe there was a fight with the spouse, or maybe I had a bad night's sleep last night for no really particular reason. I didn't have a good night's sleep. So sick kid at home, right? Things that happen in life that are just the ebbs and flows of a typical month in the business world. So for me, like, where the individual kind of in the management comes in, if there is enough trust and safety, which I think is a huge conversation to be had within organizations, because it is not wanting to share a sign of lack of trust and safety. I think it's an interesting question. I don't think it's necessarily a correlation one-to-one, but it's an interesting question. I just would love to get to, because we've talked about the individual, the day scores. When you think about the weeks or the monthly averages, do you see a little bit different way that we might be able to look at those?
Yeah, I think with the organizations, you're absolutely right. Those trend scores are much more important, because they are much more interpretable, and prevent us from needing to dig into each individual person's data. As you said, so many things might affect, someone's HRV score, and it's really, it shouldn't be the manager's business. It's just really not helpful.
Right.
Each individual person can be in charge of tracking their HRV and checking in with themselves on a daily basis. But when it comes to an organization, we really are looking at weeks, months, years, kinds of trends, and then looking at, this month, this is what our HRV has been doing. It's trending up. What are we doing right? Oh, this next month HRV is trending down. What's going on? And as Dave said earlier in this podcast, putting those scores into context is really, really important, because just looking at a score, whether it's an individual or a team, is not terribly helpful. There's too much room for interpretation, but context will help you figure it out with a little bit more reliability, a little bit more accuracy. And it just kind of points you in the right direction. You know, our scores have been trending down the last 6 months.
Yeah.
You know, it's probably not random and it's not individual differences. There is something going on in this team, in this organization. You know, if there is a way to compare scores one group to another within the organization, that can give us a little bit more information. You know, is one group doing something different from others, and what's going on there.
Awesome. Dave, you know, you got two people in the psychology world talking trust and safety. I'd love to just get your thoughts on this sort of dilemma as we hit with people not maybe trusting enough, the de-identifications. I'd love just to get your thoughts on what Ina just said.
Well, yeah. I mean, there does have to be a higher level of stress, you know, or I'm sorry, trust, because when you do look at that, you know, Matt, you said, okay, you know, you're giving your social security number, you're giving your bank account number, but those are all external things, right? Those are all external things that you're not so deeply connected with, even though, yes, those are your identifying factors, right? Somebody could steal your identity or open a bank account or take out a loan in your name, but it's not you inside. You know, it's giving somebody access to your biometrics is like letting somebody look inside of you. And it is intimate data. Some people are very disconnected with that, but a lot of people would be very, very connected to it. Like, you know, if you think about how many people, you know, would say, and I think you might even say this in the book too, Matt, with that is, you know, well, you know, I don't want to share my information with big tech. I don't want to share my information with Apple, but it's on your wrist. It's already happening.
Oh, all right, yeah.
You know, and when you break it down like that, then people go, oh, okay. You know, so then it, you know, it takes that barrier down a little bit, or maybe, you know, makes them go into hiding. I don't know, one of the two. But yeah, you do have to establish trust. That is a huge piece of the puzzle. And then you know, there is no need to be able to see an individual as well. So like you guys talked about the identifiers, where you know, where you don't need to actually understand what the person exactly is. And just like what you guys were talking about, made me think of, you know, we have these, you know, yearly marketing calendars, yearly event calendars associated with our business, right? And it would be so cool to look at this and see how our whole organization is doing as we go through summertime, where we're having these really fun outdoor events and we're doing this and we're doing that and we're socializing and having all this fun. And then you look at months like February in Chicago, where everybody is depressed and their vitamin D is down. And
nobody probably wants to be outside whatsoever.
Yeah, and you haven't seen the sun in months. You know, so it would be very interesting to overlay, you know, the heart rate variability trends of the entire organization with things like that. You know, what events really do bring life to the organization? What seasons bring life to the organization? Where do we see the most stress? And then how does that correlate to the bottom line too?
Yeah.
You know, and you know, this stuff for most any company should be relatively accessible when you look back over a year. And then in planning that next year, you know, okay, so February is a drag, and as a result, numbers are always down in February. What can we do to make that month pop for us, you know? And there's where you can really start to use those numbers as a very powerful tool. But
yeah, and then, you know, with the result of increased patient engagement, increased patient satisfaction. I mean, that's that idea of where I think this is a revolutionary leadership tool. And again, I just want to reiterate that the people who are, a lot of them, I would say if 9 out of 10 would never share, at least that's their response, 8 out of those 9 would for a $25 gift card. So I think what I'm hearing is that you owe me something for this. Like, maybe for a couple lattes, I'll give this to you, or maybe for $100 off my healthcare insurance plan. But I think as leaders think about, especially those that think innovatively about this, is that this is worth something. That's I think where we're at with this adaptation of biometrics into the workplace is that this is a negotiation at this point in time. And I just think to be open to that. And then how do you set that up where people feel safe? Because they can find their 8-year-old and take a heart rate variability score. You can cheat on HRV. So you that trust and that safety, which will be themes throughout our series, are going to be huge. So Dave, Ina, thank you for this great discussion. This chapter really is why I really wanted to write this book with both of you, because I think that there's so much potential good in bringing in biometrics to improve the outcomes of a business, no matter what those outcomes are. Again, social, emotional, cognitive increases in those functionings. It's going to make any business a better place to come to work every day, a better place to engage with customers. Again, whether that's doing surgery or whether that's a big presentation to close a deal, heart rate variability can really help create a healthier work environment, which is obviously the goal of this entire series. So thank you both. We'll publish chapter 3 next week. And then talk about it the week after. So we'll see you all soon. Thank you.
Thank you both.